Hello everyone, I'm the Shardy Guy and I'm finally back with a brand new video. Now, before I start, I will just get a few things out of the way. Number one, this is purely my opinion based, so please respect my opinions, and if you have any contradictions, you're free to say what you want, but this is just purely my opinions and how I would do things. Number two, yes, I am aware that qualifying's not getting run again until I think the Charlotte Roval or something like that. So just before we get to that, yes, I know. Before anyone decides to do any facts checking or whatever. Of course, recently there was the Daytona 500 where Michael McDowell won his first ever race in the Cup Series after 300 odd starts. I can't remember the exact amount, but yeah, it was a lot. And probably a lot of people were surprised by that, but I mean, if you looked at his stats, it always kind of been up the front, and it was probably only a matter of time before he would finally get a victory and take the last lap as you shall, but yeah, he won, so. But of course, there were a lot of talking points to come out of that weekend. I mean, of course, the last lap, as I said, take that as you shall. But even before we even got to the races, there was controversy around it. And of course, the main one was the situation with Dillon. So, of course, the current qualifying system, which I will admit is a bit stupid. It's basically all the chartered vehicles. Do not get me started on the charter system. They're all in, so that's 36 spots taken. And then the two fastest open teams, they would have gotten in, which would be Ryan Preece and David Reagan, from memory. So technically, there would have only been 2 spots available, 1 spot from each respective duel, and I can't remember exactly how many cars were in the running. I think it was like 6 or 7 were in it for those final 2 spots. So, of course, the duel finished, and despite finishing technically as the highest rated open car, because he finished behind Ryan Preece, of course, Ryan Preece had already secured his spot through being the fastest open car, but then Ryan Preece technically won the duel as well. That meant that it was based off qualifying times, and Austin Cindric ended up taking the effectively 39th spot, and unfortunately for Dillon, despite being the highest rated open car, he was slower in qualifying, so he was the one who got booted. This kind of always brought me back up to something I used to always do when I started to watch NASCAR in late 2012, early 2013 was kind of really when I started noticing what was going on. And the qualifying system, I kind of understood in a way, but in another way, I didn't really understand. So firstly, how would I change the Daytona 500 qualification, I guess you can say? Firstly, I would get rid of all provisionals, all charters, all that. It's new season, clean slate. Whatever happened last year, it means nothing to what is going on this season. So basically what I would do is, if we were to keep the 40 car field, as an example, I'll keep the 40 cars. The top 30 cars would end up would automatically qualify themselves into the Daytona 500. And whoever qualified from 31st down, they would have to race their way in through the duels. The names that 31st down, they are shown here. So if you look at the list, so we got Tyler Reddick, who was technically, let's not get into that debate, technically the Rookie of the Year last year, but let's not set off another riot here. so let's not do that. There was Jamie McMurray, of course. He would have had to race his way in. Former Daytona 500 winner. He would have to race his way in. Other chartered vehicles. So Anthony Alfredo, however he prefers to be called. He would have to race his way in. Quinn Hoff would have to race his way in. Corey LaJoie. And pretty much much to most of NASCAR Nation's joy, all the Rick Ware cars would have had to race their way in to qualify. And of course, that would include Derek Cope. And we'll get to him in a moment. Basically, what I'll do is the remaining 10 spots will be split between the two duels. So it would be top 5 finishing cars. They make their way in to the Daytona 500, and who unfortunately finish 6th or further down in that Daytona 500, they would unfortunately get the boot. So there would be 14 cars actually would be left for the 10 spots. So to put it in hindsight, technically 5 cars would make it in each duel, and the last 2 would unfortunately not qualify for the Daytona 500. So if we look at the first duel as a bit of hindsight, the top 5 finishing cars who did not make their way in would have been Ty Dillon, Jeremy McMurray, Quinn Hoff, Timmy Hill, and Tyler Braddock. So they would all make their respective Daytona 500s, and they could be sorted out however they would like to sort them out by, whether qualifying, probably not quite their qualifying times, like their finishing orders or wherever. So for example, if Ty Dillon finished 6th odd, I think it was 6th or 7th, something like that, and if someone in the second duel finished in the top 5, they can get the 31st spot, and etc. etc. From the second duel, of course, this would actually cause I'll say this: the cars that would not have qualified from the first duel would have been Cody Ware and Josh Bilicki. So they would not have made the field. So that, luckily for those who NASCAR fandom or whatever, that's 2 of the Rick Ware cars out of the field. And in the second duel, it would have been Corey LaJoie, Joey Gase, Garrett Smithley. Derek Cope would have actually ended up in the field in this hindsight. Yeah, I was debating on whether to split it by their top 5 or top 4, but either way, Derek Cope was the 4th highest vehicle in that respective duel, so technically he's raced his way into the field, whether we liked it or not. And the last spot would have been taken by Noah Gragson. Those missing the field would have been BJ McLeod and a real big, wouldn't quite really call it a big name, but kind of the only real standout name that would have missed the field would have been Anthony Alfredo. He would have missed the field in the front row car. Now, of course, driver changes could potentially happen with the do not qualifiers to make the field. So like Alfredo could end up in another front row car. Cody Ware could end up take over from Derek Cope, since his dad owns the team. Well, hang on, technically probably not, because Cope's was technically through Starcom, so maybe Ware might take over, somebody else might take over Gazers potentially, but yeah, let's not go into that hindsight. Let's just base off how they finished. So, of course, with the duels, with so many spots being available, there might not be as much catastrophe, so we might reduce it down to 4. This is just an idea. Another idea would have been to move it to, well, if we moved it back to 43, what would happen? I've gone back to 2014 Daytona 500 for this qualifying method because I couldn't use 2015 because, they were using pack qualifying, and yeah. Just ask Clint Boyer how that ended. So what I would do with this qualifying method is the top 35 quickest would have made the field outright, and the top 4 from their respective duels would make the race. And the names whom would have still been left are here. Well, Brian Vickers would have been on the outside. Jerry McMurray would have been on the outside again. David Reagan as well. He would have been on the outside for this one. Both the Bonnies. Alex Bowman, technically, he would also have to race his way in. But, of course, this time he was in BK, and they were never that great. From the first duel, it would have been Josh Wise, Cole Witt, Alex Bowman, and Brian Vickers. From the second duel, it would have been Jamie McMurray, both Labontes, Terry and Bobby, and David Reagan would have also made the field. Those who did not qualify would have been Joe Nemechek, Michael McDowell. So, 7 years ago, he was not even making the Daytona 500. 7 years later, he wins the whole damn thing. The other did not qualifiers were Eric McClure, Ryan Truex, and Morgan Shepherd. If I used the formula for this year's Daytona 500, 4 cars that did not qualify would have made the race, and vice versa. Compared to, if we go back to 2014's formula, the same cars would have not qualified. So McClure, McDowell, Nemechek, Truex, and Shepherd, they all failed to make the field anyway under the old method. So if we used this method, probably would not have changed a lot, apart from potentially different cars would have having to race their way in. Of course, also, what would I do if qualifying gets rained out, or for whatever reason they can't complete a qualifying session? How would I set the field if there's more than the set limit showing up? Might as well just go straight to the Xfinity race that happened this year, when qualifying happened and 5 cars did not qualify because it got rained out, and technically probably most of them would have probably made the field anyway. And unfortunately, they did not have any owner points to go off, and unfortunately, they were not on the wrong side of the cutoff line. So, just for a quick rundown on who did not make the field for this race, it was Chris Cockrum, Ronnie Bassett, Mario Goslin, Jordan Anderson, and Tyler Reddick. Now, the 2 this would have affected most would have been probably Ronnie Bassett and Jordan Anderson, because they were definitely planning on full-time efforts, and unfortunately now they're on the outside because they don't have any owner points to go off. So unfortunately they're pretty much stuck in purgatory until potentially the Roval, unless they can get something else sorted. However, if it got rained out, I would go back to practice times. Because, you gotta practice before qualifying, and more often than not, cars would do a qualifying sim anyway, or most cars would do a qualifying simulation anyway, so that they can see roughly where they're going to end up, and, if there's any last minute changes they can do to try and move their way up, and probably even the cars that would normally have to race their way in anyway, they would do a run anyway to see where they are with all the other go homers, and decide on whether they're a good chance or not. If it got changed to whom would make it or not, the cars on the outside would have been Ronnie Bassett, Jesse Little, Robbie Lyons, Kyle Weatherman, and Josh Williams, whom did not actually set a lap time in practice. So that would have been an example of, well, you didn't set a lap time for whatever reason. Well, more often than not, teams probably know whether there's a chance that rain would come or not. So yeah, if they have to go, okay, we might have to hightail it and set a decent lap here. Otherwise, yeah, we're on the outside, and that's not good. And to put it into perspective, well, Ronnie Bassett didn't qualify anyway, so it wouldn't have really mattered. But yeah, the other four guys, they finished in the top 25, and Kyle Weatherman, he actually ended up with the top 15. So if those five guys made, well, technically four, because yeah, Bassett would have not qualified anyway. So yeah, if those four guys ended up in the field anyway, would have that changed it? Probably not. And yeah, for whatever reason, if a major team ends up having an issue in qualifying and they end up on the outside, they could potentially bribe outs. Well, bribe outs is a big word, but probably buy out a seat in a team for somebody else to take the spot. So I remember Nemco did with Scott Speed on a couple of occasions. Scott Speed wouldn't make the race, so Joe Nemechek lended him the spot, and Scott Speed would take his spot in the race. I'll finish with my final point. What would happen if, for whatever reason, many cars, let's do this for an example. If 41 cars show up to a cup race, and one car crashes before they can set a lap time, and another car has an electrical gremlin that fails to let them get off pit road, so they're unable to set a lap time. How would I split those two up? Well, of course, to go back, I would use the practice time, and whoever was quickest in practice, they would make it, and unfortunately, the slowest one out of the two, they sadly would not qualify. A good example to really show this is the 2015 race in Atlanta, where a lot of cars just had issues going through tech. They kept failing, and eventually they just ran out of time to set a lap. So what I would do in that scenario is the top 34 cars who set a lap time, they're all in, because, well, it's not fair on those guys. They're not the ones who fire trucked up. They deserve to be in the race. And the remaining spots in the field would be taken by their practice times. So in this scenario, it would have been Tony Stewart would have gotten the 35th spot because he was the quickest in qualifying out of the ones who did not set a time. Next would have been Matt Kenseth, Jeff Gordon, Regan Smith, and Jimmy Johnson would have ended up 39th. So out of the list, that would have been all your big guys, basically, would have already been in the race. So that's all your big guys in. So really, to a certain extent, you don't really need owner points anymore, because if you base it off practice, the top guys are already in. And the final 4 spots would have been taken by Landon Castle, Alex Bowman, Michael Annett, and Cole Witt. So the one change there is that Michael Annett would have ended up in the race outright. Of course, he ended up in the race anyway, but that was because he was taken by he took the spot of Brian Scott. But of course, Brian Scott was already in the race. He qualified 32nd, so he's already in. And unfortunately, the cars that would not have qualified would have been Reed Sorensen, Jeb Burton, Mike Wallace, and Matt DiBenedetto. Amazing how far he's come too. So the only car that would have missed out under this circumstances compared to the other circumstances would have been Jeb Burton in the BK car. Whether if Brian Scott did his own, would have done the same thing anyway, like he did with Michael Annett. Again, that's not for me to decide, like with the Daytona 500. That's not what I'm going into this video about. Basically, in conclusion, what would I do with NASCAR's qualifying system? Well, as I said, get rid of charters, get rid of owner points, and yeah, just base it off qualifying speeds. If you're quick enough, you're in. If you're not, either sail off into the sunset, as they say, or see how much cash you got in the bank to try and bribe another team in. If qualifying gets rained out and they can't run it, base it off your practice times. Because, yeah, I'm pretty sure if teams have enough brain cells, they will do their own, do a practice qualifying simulation, and they'll find their own way in. Yeah, this will wrap up this video. As I said, this is purely based off my own opinions and just using rhetorical events for whatever data I had online. Whether, of course, results would have probably changed with if they had this set of data, but yeah, as I said, this is my personal opinion. I'm sure everybody else has their own personal views, and you're perfectly fine for your own opinion. So yeah, this will wrap up this video. Like, share, and subscribe. Follow me on my Twitter, where I will be doing tweets of pretty much who's led the most laps per season, which I've done the past couple of seasons, which I will do again for the 2021 season. See you all in the next video.